Professor Venkatachalapathy is professor at the Madras Institute of Development Studies. He has taught at Manomanian Sundarar University, Tirunelveli, the Madras University, the National University of Singapore, as well as the University of Chicago. He's an accomplished Tamil writer and has published widely on the social and cultural history of Tamil Nadu. His publications include The Province of the Book, Scholars, Scribes, and Scribblers in Colonial Tamil Nadu. In those days, there was no coffee, Writings in Cultural History, Who Owns That Song, The Battle for Subramaniam Bharati's Copyright, and Tamil Characters, Personalities, Politics, Culture. He won the VKRV Rao Award in 2007. May I please invite Professor Chalapathy.
Barney Pate used to say, it's a real match. Universally admired, respected, and loved. These are very trying times, and it is so reassuring for us to be all together at this moment when the oldest civilizations is going through very difficult times. But there will always be things that we can celebrate. And what better thing to do than celebrate the life and work of dear friend David. I'm really honored to be here. Firstly, let me thank Prakriti Foundation and the person who doesn't want to be named for organizing this conference, but I think he's also a little cheeky person. He has given me this first possible slot after heavy dinner, heavy lunch. I assure you that I will not disturb your sleep. So, this what I have taken up today to speak about is a very interesting book that many of us might be very familiar with. Vinodarasa Manjari. Probably we can translate it as a bouquet of strange flavors rather than strange emotions, which was my first iteration. I'm not sure if David has already written about this lovely book, but who can be sure? Even he can't be sure. With so many books, so many chapters, he himself may not be sure if he has already written an essay on this particular book. If you have and you recall it, please reserve it for a later day. Okay. But this is a book, I chose this book because this is a book that is right up David's alley. It engages with the lives and works of major Tamil poets, especially medieval Tamil poets. And it's a cornucopia of very lively poems, compilation of lively poems, what David, along with his collaborators, once called poems for the right moment. So I thought this would be very appropriate to talk about this particular book. So, Vinodarasa Manjari has a very curious place in Tamil literary history. It's beyond doubt that all Tamil scholars, all Tamil connoisseurs have read this book. Though I have not seen this book being prescribed in any syllabus or curriculum in the last 100 years. It's a very big claim, but I am sure I am right. And most Tamil writers, certainly of the first generation, the precursors of Tamil modernity, they were very familiar with this book. S.G. Ramanujan Naidu, Pudumai Pittan, Kalki, all of them had read this book. I don't know if Bharati has read this book. I have not been able to find any reference. But it's very clear that this book was read and enjoyed thoroughly. But it is not, nobody really acknowledges having read this book. I'll come to the reason why that may be so. First, let us talk about the book and the text, and it is my fate that any book that I am interested in, it's very difficult to find any tangible evidence about the provenance of the text, the biographical details of the author. The publishing history also gets very complicated. And this is very surprising considering that this book was not composed in bygone age, but as recently as in the mid 19th century. If you look up the Kalai Kalanjam, the Tamil Encyclopedia, which is a fantastic work, there is a very brief passage about the author of this book, who goes by the name of Ashtavadani Veerasamy Chettiar. What do we actually know about this man? So it reminds me of a story from my school days. Students were asked to write 2 lines about Mahakavi Subramanya Bharati. They said there was a Mahakavi, his name was Subramanya Bharati. This is exactly this is precisely what we know about this Ashtavadani Veerasamy Chettiar. His name is Ashtavadani. His first name is Veerasamy and his caste is Chettiar. So what this Ashtavadanam is, we are all familiar with the name Ashtavadanam. That is a memory feat where the scholar or the conjurer, if you may call it, does 8 mnemonic or memory feats simultaneously. When I checked it up, I realized that there is no consensus on what this Ashtavadanam is. Each one comes up with various different 8 feats. Okay, and then we don't know what kind of a Chettiar he is, whether he is a Beri Chettiar or a Komati Chettiar or a Vaniya Chettiar. But certainly he was not a Nagarathar, Natukotte Chettiar. Apologies to Arumuga Tamilan who is there. We don't know the date of his birth. And it is even more curious, we don't even know the date of his death. The fragmentary information that we have is that he was a student of Iyatramil Ramanuja Kavirayar, who is a very important name both in the Madras School of Orientalism, there is the College of Fort St. George, who trained many European scholars. So he was a student of this man. And then there is one very small reference to him in Myron Winslow's The Comprehensive Tamil and English Dictionary, the great dictionary of 1862, where Winslow calls him a competent native. Okay, this is the highest praise. And I suppose this is the highest praise because the native comes with a capital N. So he helped him compile the dictionary and he left this task and became the Tamil Pandit of the Presidency College, Madras. Then purely through an internet search, Wikipedia has just a stub on both Vinodarasa Manjari. I know Milind Brahme was trying to check. He wanted to be one up on me. You can't do that relying on Wikipedia. So I found a reference to one little pamphlet of songs that he had published in 1845. It is housed in the Roja Muthia Research Library. It is called Kalyana Esalum Kudamagan Matrum Kadai Sirappu. No idea what. This is probably some ephemeral song that was written, which is used to sing at the time of marriage, etc. But very, very surprisingly, we know something else about this man. Very crucial biographical information. He had a tuft of hair and it was completely grey. This is the information we have. It comes from a poem written by Kanagasabai Pulavar. We don't know who he is, but this poem has survived, which is about the tuft of hair, the kudmi that he had, which was completely grey. So since this is the most extensive document that I have been able to find, I am going to read out that poem. Navalar Viaka, Pavalar Navan, Nankala Madivalar Dongim, Pavalar Mugam Sem Padumama Kuvikum, Panmayo, மாயனோடு உளத்து மாவலர் வீராசாமி வேல் குஞ்சி மலரையன் தேவி வெண்கஞ்சம் பூ வளர்ந்திருப்ப அதன் மிசை இருந்த பொற்பென பொலிந்திருக்குமார். So you got a white tuft as white as Saraswati's, the flower on which Saraswati sits. So this exhausts the entire information about the author of this book, this great work. So what do we know about this book itself? This is one edition of the book, much later edition. So this is a collection of essays. I'm not going to tell you the number of essays that this volume contains, because there are 3 or 4 different numbers counts that we have. But what we know for sure is that it was composed in the mid and late 1850s, and it was published as a series of articles that were later compiled and published as the Vinodarasa Manjari. Now, Dinavartamani is a magazine that has not survived so far. It is apparently a bilingual journal, published both in Tamil and Telugu. From its name, Dinavartamani, it is argued that it is a daily. I doubt it, that there could have been a vernacular Tamil or Telugu daily in the 1850s in Madras. It's very unlikely. So it's probably a compendium of news that was published periodically. This journal was edited and published by Peter Percival, the missionary, educationist, and professor of Oriental languages at the Presidency College. And more relevant to this particular our topic of discussion, he is known as the compiler of 2 pioneering collections of proverbs. I'll come back to why it's very, very important, this particular piece of information. Now, coming to the publication history itself, it's a very complicated history. All references to Vinodarasa Manjari say that it was first published in 1876. But very curiously, John Murdoch, in his famous catalogue of Tamil printed books, published in 1865, he refers to this book as having been published already. So, probably sometime in the early 1860s, it has been published. The second edition, which everybody believes is the first edition, was published by the famous printer and publisher of the Kalaratnagaram Press, U. Pushparadhan Chettiar. This contained 15 essays, and there was the addition of a 16th essay, which I'll come to shortly. Then subsequently, there is another edition in 1891, and it has 2 more essays added to it. But what is very clear from that introduction is that this book was rampantly pirated and distributed from Karaikal, which was then a French enclave. See, in those days, civil debtors used to run away to Pondicherry and Karaikal to escape, their debtors from chasing them. So this was also the case. They would do pirated editions so that the British Indian authorities would not come after them. Why I underline this is that it was pirated because it was a very, very popular text. Why it is popular is what I will now come to. So I said, before I get into that, the complications are that in the second edition, a 16th essay had been added, which is basically a retelling of the famous Paramartha Guru Kadai written by Veeramamunivar. Then in the 1891 edition, there are 2 further chapters added, one about Avvayar, another about one short hunchback, the story of the dwarf hunchback called Sirukunan Kadai. Why somebody else would add writings by somebody else in a volume, who added it, why is not very clear. To make matters worse, in a 1921 edition, 2 further chapters have been added. Padivradai Sarithram, Kalidasa Pulavar Sarithram. But by making a close reading, it is very clear that only the first 15 essays would have been written by Ashtavdani Veerasamy Chettiar, because it has a very clear stamp on this. What is the very clear stamp? So this is where I come to. Luckily, the time in which it was composed is very clear. From internal evidence itself, we can see that this was composed somewhere between 1855 and 1858 or 59. One is the reference to the various forms of torture used by Madras administrators, Madras revenue officials, to extract revenue from farmers. And there is a very clear description of these various forms of torture. From the description provided by Veerasamy Chettiar, looks like Tamil is as rich in such torture terminology as medieval European languages. So we are right up there. Then there is a reference to the Great Revolt of 1857. Then there is a reference to the Great Revolt of 1857, and then there is the reference to the institution of a new system of communication, postage, during Lord Canning's times. So it's very clear that these essays were all written between 1856 and 1858 or 59. So what makes this book a very interesting book? I would say that there are three kinds of essays in this particular work. The first type of essay is not what would qualify it to make it a bestseller. It's outwardly, the content is didactic. So the topics covered are Deivam Kolgai, and more important, Karpu Nilamai. All the men in the late 19th and early 20th century were very keen on expounding on the chastity that is prescribed for women, of course. So there is a long chapter on it. Then there is a chapter on morality, and there is a chapter on gratitude. But though the topic looks very didactic, the writing style of Ashtavdani Veerasamy Chettiar is anything. It is didactic, but it's written in a very colorful language. I'll come to that shortly after describing the two other kinds of essays that he wrote. The second kind of essay is contemporary criticism. This is very interesting. That's what I think this makes it a modern text. Here I am closer to David, even though I have disagreed with him on what constitutes Tamil modernity. But I am closer to David in this particular matter than what later writers have said. Then there is the substantial chunk of the book which records the oral traditions about 4 or 5 very important Tamil poets. Kamban, Avvayar, Vattakuttar, Pugalenthi, Kalamegapulavar and Egambavalan. So there are oral traditions about these poets. It narrates the stories around them, and it also records many of the poems that they have written, many of them impromptu poems, many of them isolated poems, many of them standalone poems rather than long narrative poems. So on the face of it, this one would first wonder, why is this an important book? What makes this book very important is that the first reason he sets up, we don't know who wrote the introduction to these books. Let us hope he wrote it himself. He says very clearly that Tamil literature is known for its great poetic riches, but there is no prose. There is no modern prose. I am setting out to rectify that by writing a kind of modern prose. So if you look at the prose that he has written in the 1850s, we don't have immediate comparisons except, of course, Beski, Virama Munivar's Paramartha Guru Kadai, which is at least 150 years earlier to his times. But very clearly, there is a stamp of modernity in it. Even though the sentences are long, they are not complicated. The length of the sentences is basically by using the conjunction whom. But the way the sentences are constructed, it's direct, it addresses a very clear audience. But the most striking feature of these essays is that is why people remember it. Once, I think somebody said of Kosambi's book that there is not a page which doesn't have a new idea. This is a book where there is not a page which doesn't have at least 5 proverbs and 6 idioms. And these proverbs are the most colorful proverbs that you can imagine. It is replete with proverbs. It is brimming with proverbs and idioms. On the one hand, it puts on paper, cold ink and paper, many proverbs which would have only been circulating orally. Then probably is coining some new ones. Some of the proverbs which we are already familiar with, you have varying versions of this proverb. And many of these proverbs, like some of the best proverbs, they are backed by stories, right? Pazhaya kurudi kadava thiradina, unless you know that story, you would not understand. But the difficulty in this particular book is some of these proverbs, it's impossible to figure out what was behind this. So it is full of proverbs, and if you are going to sit all by yourself and be reading it, the number of times you are chuckling and smiling to yourself, people are going to think that you have a mobile phone with you with a ear plug in your ears, listening to something on YouTube. No, you are not. You are actually reading Vinodarasa Manjari. It is impossible to read this book without breaking into smiles. Virar kadagu kondai, tanak kadagu mottai. So everybody else should finish their talk within 30 minutes, while I will take 45 minutes. That is the meaning of this proverb. Edakkadagu mottai, pirar kadagu kondai. Next number of proverbs like this, like Bouquet vaichi, purimavai mechinala. There are some, of course, unprintable ones also. So this whole book is full of these kind of proverbs. Now, as I am going to, when I conclude in another 5-10 minutes, I will argue that this is precisely what has made this book anathema to modernists. The very use of, or the excessive use of proverbs and idioms is what actually makes it anathema to lots of people. Because we believe that modern writing, modern prose writing, modernity is characterized by how much you are deviating from tradition, how much you are trying not to quote unquote get encumbered by the baggage of tradition. So you will find that, I'll give you a classic example. Sundar Ramasamy, the great Tamil writer, I'll challenge you in his hundreds and hundreds of pages of his writing, prose writing, you will not find a single proverb. If at all you will find any allusion to a proverb, it will be only in a negative way or in a very incomplete way. So the way modern Tamil prose evolved actually made this book, to be shunned by modern writers. They would read it, they would enjoy it. I think most of my mentors, not in colleges or not in schools, but outside. All of them were familiar with Vinodarasa Manjari. They would enjoy this book, make references to it, but I've never seen anyone write it. In fact, when I went through many of my old notes and things like that, I find that references made to Vinodarasa Manjari only as a kind of quaint text, not as a text, it is an exotic text, not as a text that has any contemporary relevance. But I think it is a great mistake to read this text in that manner. But second, why I am surprised that many people have missed it is that here, I would say that when I blame others, here I am trying to get a clean sheet for myself, because thankfully I went through my notes and I found that in 2000, I've actually written about Vinodarasa Manjari in a series edited by Meenakshi Mukherjee, a series called Past Continuous in the Hindu in 1999 or 2000. So I will refer to 2 or 3 essays in the second part. Is 3 essays. One, it's called Payanil Ulagu, Contemporary Agriculture. Then a wonderful essay called Kala Beda Iyalbu. It is a long essay which is structured as a conversation between 2 people. One is called Subhakshan, the other is called Vibhakshan. One is taking the side that things have changed for the good. The Vibhakshan takes a position that everything has gone to the dogs. So this argument is played out, and it, in a sense, wonderful record, perceptive record of all that changed in early colonial times. So there are references to the coming of books, the references to increase in production of knowledge and wealth, decrease in poverty, more freedom, liberty. It actually says at one instance, if you were to walk past the governor of Madras without acknowledging him, nobody would punish you. This is one idea that he expresses here. So this is a long essay which records all these things. I don't have the time to go through it. Everywhere, but every statement is peppered with, laced with proverbs and sayings. Then there's one excellent essay called Geeta Vatya Vinodam. This is once again a very, what could you say, in a very non-judgmental way of writing about music. 1850s, apparently a Western music concert takes place in the bungalow of the governor of Madras. That particular chapter records this particular music concert. What do we always do when Indians write about Western music? They climb on Uchani Komlobe Okandupanga. They sit on the top floor and look down upon everything else. We are the divine music. We are the producers of divine music. We improvise. We are skillful. We are, inspired by God. Unlike, this crass Western music, it is all composed of, flat notes. Everything is recorded on paper. This is a very non-judgmental way. He says, this is very elevating music. And I think this is the first record, certainly in the Tamil language, of a non-Indian music concert, or probably the first record of any kind of music concert. Then the final section, I think, which is perhaps something that David thoroughly enjoyed. I'm sure he's enjoyed it. So there is a very long chapter on how Kamban performed the premiere of his Kambaram. That is the longest chapter in the book. Then there is a chapter on Avaya, Vattakutta, Puri. You realize that many of the oral stories that we have heard about jealousy about Kamban's poetry, the difficulties in how, when he premiered it, the various obstacles that were put on that path. What I would say, the JNU, CHS seminars were less brutal than the kind of ordeals that Kamban and Pugadendi Pulavar had to undergo. So what he does is he gives exact reproductions of or recordings of these poems. You can make comparisons with later day versions. Very choice poems, the best poems, which have the great amount of words, and all of them are explained. Gives a commentary on it, and he also gives the context in which they were written. Of course, this context, there is no historical veracity to this context. So keep all this in mind, and then now we'll come to the final section and take a few more minutes. So why is this text, which is so rich, which is so fun to read, why has it gone into oblivion? When I say oblivion, it is actually, it is quite fitting for this book. A book which records oral traditions is also a book which is celebrated in the oral tradition and not in the written tradition. Your literary histories don't talk about it. In fact, the only essay, extended essay that I've seen about this is by a most unlikely person, Sala Ilandire, who would not be known for being very adventurous. He wrote a book called Pudu Tamil Mudalvargal, where he has a long chapter on this book, but it is only a kind of commentary of this book rather than a contextualization or analysis of the book. But all the same, that he recognizes him as a Pudu Tamil Mudalvar, I think, must be acknowledged here. So, final, just 2-3 more minutes, is why is this book why has this book not been given its due? Why is it not prescribed for study? Why have people not taken up the task of editing this book? Now, there is a publishing mania, editing mania in Tamil Nadu. If anybody doesn't have a job, he or she picks up a book and say, I'm doing a critical edition or I'm doing a new edition. What is new? This number of new misprints and typos enter this. That is what is new. And the index that is found in the first volume is missing in the new editions. So, why have people completely ignored it? So, first reason I say positive, I think, is that the reliance on this proverbs and idioms, which seem to hark back to an older world. This is not an expression of your own self, seems to have come in the way of taking it, giving it a second place. I still recall, the great writer Ku Alagirisamy. Once he was hired to become the editor of one particular journal as a stopgap journal editor. He got fed up and left that journal because he said, that is the writing style of that editor whom I had to imitate was that Albert Fernando would write half a dozen proverbs in every paragraph. So I don't want to do it. So you find that modern writers do not use proverbs all that much, but I use them a lot. That's why people say I'm a very antediluvian scholar. But aptly used, a proverb can be like it can be a needle in a banana, or it can be a battering ram. It can be do both. So that is one reason. The second, here, despite my own ideological proclivities, I have to agree with David. Why this book has been ignored is because this predates our rediscovery of the Sangam literature. There is practically no reference to Sangam. There is no reference to the Sangam literature. It is all about medieval poets and medieval literature. It's full of, quote unquote, fanciful stories, mythological stories of miracles, which is completely, out of sync with the rationalist way in which Tamil literature, Tamil literary tradition has progressed in the 20th century, which is something that David has highlighted in his book. And I also agree with it. Tamil is not exhausted by Sangam literature. Sangam literature is the pinnacle of Tamil literature, but far from exhausts the richness of Tamil literature. And lastly, once again, an aspect of modernity is this the ahistoricity that characterizes this text. In fact, even in a short paragraph, as I told you, that Kalaikalanjam entry, which gives you barely any information about Ashtavadhanam, Veerasamy Chettiar, finds the space to say that there is no historical evidence to attest to the oral traditions they have recorded. So that is what they said. So this question of authenticity, this undermining of the importance of oral traditions, has what I think has put this book in the background. So I think it is very undeserving of that neglect. So I will end with one last line. This last line is from Murdoch's catalog. After giving that entry, here's one annotation. Murdoch says, the style of this book is much admired. And I think it's a great text. I hope some of you will get back to this book. I'm sorry there is no good edition of this book. Even this particular edition is by Mevi Venugopalapillai. He has done a fantastic job in 1956, I think. But once again, it requires a critical edition, which will tell us which are the original essays by Veerasamy Chettiar, which are not, what are the problems with this book. With that, I end. Thank you very much.
I'd like to know what your thoughts are about the people who added essays to this, the original 15. Right? You said original 15?
Yeah.
And isn't that the nature of oral literature itself? So is that the written text is taking on the life of an oral text in some way in the process of gaining those editions? And yeah, I think I'll leave
Yeah.
it there. And then
I think you have both posed the question and answered it. This is the greatest tribute you can pay to a text which owes its origin to oral traditions. So the people who have added it, there is no explanation. They don't tell you why they do it. But but they seem to think that it is completely acceptable. It is kosher to do that. Add things. But very clearly, none of the additions have the stamp of Chettiar's genius. I think this is genius. I could just reel off any number of you, turn any page, just I turned a page. Panayeri Vidundavanai, Kadaveri Tuvaitadu. Okay? This is a proverb which I've never heard in my life. நமக்கு தெரிஞ்ச பழமொழி என்ன? குப்புற தள்ளிய குதிரை குளியம் பறிச்சுதான், அதுதான் தெரியும். This is பனையேறி விழுந்தவனை கடாவேறி துவைத்தது. So things like that. Just பேர் கங்கா பவானி, தாகத்திற்கு தண்ணீர் கிடையாது. Yes. Pardon me? It is impossible to translate. No, proverbs are impossible to translate. There would be equivalents. But the funny thing is, he gives different versions or similar sounding proverbs. This particular one, yes, another Panayeri Vidundavanai Kida Eri Tuvaitadu would mean a fellow fell off the palm tree. And then a ram came and battered him. So this is insult compound or Kallai. Well, these are some of them are completely, politically incorrect. Mudale Dirpalai Adilum Karpini. This is something better known. Kadan Vangiyum Pattini, Kalyanam Panniyum Brahmachari. this is better known. So number of things. Anywhere where you turn it, you will find. Yeah, I'm ready for. Just one little bit I would also want to add. This book also attests to the bilingual or multilingual character of the city of Chennai in the 1850s. There are a number of Telugu proverbs, Telugu words. Obviously, all these scholars were fluent in at least two, if not three languages. Unlike now, scholars are not just monolingual; they are almost non-lingual. They're good neither in English or Tamil. So, yeah. Yes. Naresh?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, Nanda.
So I was wondering, what is the context in which he uses all these proverbs? They're essays basically on various subjects.
Yes.
Right? So where does he bring them in? Like, you were also saying that you'd come to why it was so popular that it was like people shifted cities to pirate it and things like
Okay.
that.
So he has the knack, that is his genius, his knack of weaving in the right proverb, the right context. Okay, so this is great fun to read, and that is precisely why it was pirated. So, what are the contexts? Perhaps let me go to, since I have a ready translation. Okay, shall I read the first two paragraphs of this conversation between Subhakshan and Vibhakshan? The nature of changing times. Oi, Vibhaksha, come in. It's a long time since we met. Are you doing well? Then this fellow says, Subhaksha, in these terrible times, can any good come about? Then this man, like they say, the spirit that possessed the Pillayar has taken over the people tree too. You are giving the times a bad name by ascribing your indolence to it. This is a very modern notion, I would say. Can the times be blamed for this? Your words remind me of the conversation between the stone and the coconut. So this is a proverb. Then he says, like blaming the knife when the brinjal is rotten. You ascribe everything to the lack of effort. Does one need a mirror to look at the wound on one's palm? So this is how he goes everywhere. He is able to weave it in seamlessly and most perfectly and aptly. Nowhere do you find that it is contrived. So it's not contrived anywhere. It is so natural. And that's what makes this. So people obviously enjoy reading it. And I would say that, if a good selection from this is prescribed in school textbooks, I'm sure it will make reading more lively.
I have two small questions in that. The first is, you said that, is it in the introduction that he says about the short literary biographies, that these are received through the old accounts and you can't really find historical evidence.
Oh.
Correct? So about that, do you feel this is already a response to some equivalent era of literary histories? When you feel the need to be apologetic to say that as if old accounts are not good enough and that you need to triangulate against certain things. So this is the first question. The second is the fact that he is so cleverly woven proverbs and idioms. And it almost looks like the rest of the essays are the scaffolding in which he can insert all these colorful idioms and proverbs. Could it be that it's a response to, say, what you will see as the practice of producing catalogs of proverbs? So in Canada, for example, the early publications of the Vassal Mission was these lists of proverbs that they collected and tried to translate. So they somehow felt that this was part of their anthropological exercise. And you see it as some kind of unique way of doing the same thing.
Second question first. I don't think this was attempting a catalog. This is a very learned text by a brilliant mind who is conscious about for whom he is writing. He is actually addressing a reader who is going to be reading it Well, the facade is edification, but it is clearly intellectual entertainment. It is clear pleasure of the text. So it is, we know it's very clear. So that is also it's named in such a way. So that is one. Second thing, uh, for whom would he be cataloging these things? Yes, Percival wants to catalog. He's a missionary. He's an educationist. This man does not have that burden, even though he was interacting both with Percival and Winslow. So his uh, project is very different. The first question, that line comes from the Tamil Encyclopedia's entry on him. So that they are able to find the space to have a judgmental comment, despite the fact they have not done due diligence to unearth any new material. I think that is very striking. So this is the discomfort that a modern mind is feeling in relation to these kind of texts. This complete discounting of oral traditions. See, without this oral tradition, why is Kamban such an important poet? Yes, he was a poetic genius, everything, but he's popular. His popularity derives from the fact that people read his texts, they were circulated through discourses, they enjoyed them, and so they created stories.
So, comment was I'm going to borrow a leaf from Murdoch's catalog and see also with regard to your dogs, and the style is much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
What was his attitude towards the events of his time? Also, you refer to the 1857 uprising. What does he say about that and other events of his time?
Events of his times. Okay. So, as I said, the specific events that he is referring to. So, first is the music concert. It's a very, very descriptive account. But the difficulty is that the terms that he uses to describe the instruments, I'm not able to make out whether he's referring to the organ, the church organ, or a piano. I'm not able to make out. But contemporaneously, the term kinnaram had been used to refer to the church organ. But I'm not able to make that out. So he's referring to certain concrete things. But the real historical things that he's referring to is, one, of course, I mentioned the extractive nature of British revenue collection. So obviously he is familiar with the reports of the Torture Commission, 1855 Torture Commission, which the government, the company government, was forced to constitute because of the numerous reports of the torture. I don't think waterboarding was used, but short of that, all other medieval forms of torture were used. So there is a description. So there is and it's very clear that very interestingly, you will find if you look at comparative texts from Bengal, for instance, where the benevolent nature of British government is always praised. That they brought peace, they brought they pacified the hinterland, the robbers and the thugs were silenced. All this is there, but something that they are not able to square up the lived experience of peasants with the benevolence of British rule. So the description is very clear, and they basically say whatever happens, whoever rules, peasants have a raw deal. So that is one. The other specific response to the events is about the 1857 revolt. So here once again, it is based on all the reports he must have received. There was no uprising in the south, but surely news came from North India. You also had the Memorial Hall, which is in Chennai. That Memorial Hall was meant to commemorate the peace that South India experienced during those times. So in these terms, so you have a very clear this conversation between Subhakshan and Vibhakshan. The Vibhakshan is able to, on almost all counts, very interestingly, even handicraft, when deindustrialization was going on, he was still able to give a very positive picture of what is happening. My own response to it is that, not that I want to criticize him or take him up on the count of being an apologist for British rule. What I find interesting is, he's has an understanding of the passage of time. He does not see passage of time as leading to a Kali Yuga where everything will be topsy-turvy. He sees time as, if you work hard, society can progress and it can be a better society rather than sitting on the thin line and rue that the whole world has gone to ruin, everything has gone to the dogs. After me the deluge, after me there is no scholar in this world. This kind of attitude is completely missing with him. So that, I'd say, is his response to his times. Very positive, very sunny view of his times. Milan?
Thank you, that was, your talk was, I think, the best antidote for post-lunch people. Thank you very much. Only one small piece of information, because you mentioned it. I mean, in my search, which also you mentioned, I did find that the Kerala University Master's Program in Tamil has four essays from this work.
Super. Very
I think
happy.
it's number 4, 6, 9, and 14, or 6, 9, 14, and 19, which means that they might be using the 1921 political version.
Okay, this is in Kerala University?
Yes.
Kerala University.
MA.
MA program. Very happy to hear this. None of you have read this, right? There are at least 2 MA students here.
Is there time for one?
Okay.
I'm just going to work backwards a little bit. I was thinking about what you were saying about aphorisms and proverbs. So when people in everyday life that I know, they either don't talk very much, and suddenly this proverb will come like a bomb, and it will disturb or settle something, and because it's never explained. Kumal Kothari writes about how he heard that. That it took him maybe 30 or 40 years to understand what was the meaning of this proverb that his aunt told. But there's the other kind of person who talks constantly and uses proverbs as a kind of stopgap method in conversations. Like it's like a scene changer or something in there. So when he's presenting these proverbs, is it a way of constructing? It's a little unformed, so please bear with me. Is it a way of constructing how to think about the times he's living in? What is the pace at which one absorbs it? What is the filter that you take it in and then digest it?
First, 2 parts, responses in 2 parts. First, I'm immediately reminded of the Tamil writer K. Rajanarayan. So K. Rajanarayan was one writer who used proverbs and phrases and idioms extensively. So that is why he has a very curious place in Tamil literary history, because nobody really considers him a modern writer. He's an outlier. But coming to this particular text itself, I think that, as I said, the biggest difficulty is that, the only thing we know about him is that he had a tuft of grey hair. So we really don't know what was his intellectual makeup. See, evidently he was familiar with English. Otherwise, what kind of conversation would he have had with Percival and Winslow? So certainly, very interestingly, all these some knowledge of English, working knowledge of English. Though, as I said, the big gap that comes up from Troutman's work, when we all work with him, was that he keeps saying the important role played by the native scholars, but we don't know anything about these native scholars. We assume that they had more than a working knowledge of Sanskrit and Telugu. This is what we know. Based on this, we are not able to go into the motivations of this text. But this is still, it beats you. Walking repository of, walking encyclopedia of proverbs. Just if you compile these proverbs, there is only one parallel to this. In the 20th century, Periyar probably used half as many proverbs as this and phrases. So it seems to be that this seems to be a connect with the earlier existing literary culture, which is very fertile and fecund. And they could state so many things, as you said, without stating it. You could say the most uncomfortable things. I want to tell you a home truth, but you don't want to, because I am an academic, I am a professor. You have to tell me that I have to stop. So you come up with a proverb. I take the message and I close my talk. So that is how you do it. So that, thank you very much.
Before closing,
No, no.
you were talking about bilingual journal. Were there translation from Tamil to Telugu and Telugu to Tamil around that time?
We don't know. Nobody has seen Dinavarthamani. So if there it is any indication, I think they would have been independent, like Indian opinion. So it's not a translation of. It's bilingual, meaning both the authors, the contributors, and the readers apparently had bilingual fluency and they read it. This seems to be the most plausible explanation. There was no need for translation, right? So I am giving you a text with English and Tamil. Paneer Selvam doesn't need a translation, right? He can read what is written in English and what is written in Tamil. They are two different texts. Translation becomes essential only when the separation takes place. So in these times, all of them were familiar. So when he actually uses Telugu proverbs, he doesn't give a translation. మా ఇంటికి వస్తే ఏం తెస్తారు, మీ ఇంటికి వస్తే ఏం ఇస్తారు. Yes, Ranveer, I come to you, what will you give me? When you come home, what will you bring me? So this is how they work. So I don't think it would have been a translation. Thank you.